Property here, and today we are going to talk about environmental psychology. And no, this isn't talking about how the trees or other such things may be getting in the way. This is talking about how your environment affects your mental health. And this is going to be just a brief overview of it, kind of like just skimming the top, because it is a rather detailed topic, and I'll go into that later in a much more long-form video on it. But environmental psychology is effectively how your environment, as I said before, how your environment affects your mental health, and how changing environments affects your mental health. So, a lot of us that serve in the military understand the acclimating to new environments, whether you're acclimating to a hotter or colder environment, whatever, depending on where you're going to, will determine how long it takes. Usually about 2 to 3 weeks for physical environment change, for your physical side to catch up with the physical environment. On the mental side, it can take as little as 3 weeks or as long as several months, depending on the situation. And usually when you're dealing with an environmental change, you're either going from an environment that's the same or generally the same to an environment that is more hostile or to an environment that is less hostile. And it doesn't matter if you're going to a more hostile or less hostile environment. There's an acclimation there on the mental health side. I'll give a great example of this. Say you're somebody who's working at a job, and they are very, very, very high tempo. Everything's got to be done now. Everything's got to be done precisely. There's a lot of precision. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of everything's got to move. Parts got to move. Everything, packages come in, packages go out. Everything's very high tempo. And then you get a promotion to a job inside the exact same company where it's very low tempo. Well, you're going to sit there with the work ethic from where you just came from in this new environment, and it's going to cause you agitation because you're used to this level of mental stress, and now you have a completely different, or you have a much lower level of mental stress. And it can create a situation in which you're trying to find ways to do more work. This, of course, will lead to another level of, this can lead to more stressors being introduced, because either your bosses in this hypothetical scenario are going to say, oh, this person's doing all this work, let's give them extra work, which you might love for a moment, but that's not going to do you any good over the long term. Or you're going to have your fellow employees in that new position come up to you and say, hey, you need to slow down because you're making it harder for us. So you have a social pressure. And environmental psychology looks at all of that. You have your social pressure, your environmental pressure, your stress levels. The physical environment also plays into it. You go from a very temperate environment that you're used to, and you end up in a very hot or cold environment. There's the environmental stress. There's the physical environmental stress on top of the mental side. Another thing too is if, say, you go from working where you drive to work and now you're working from home. You never leave work. So you'll find that a lot of your stresses that you see at home may also be stresses that you would normally have at work that now you can't escape. So in this case, for rest and relaxation, you have to go away from the home, whether it's in my case, I go to a cigar lounge. Some people might go to a bar. They may not even drink. They might just go somewhere, like the golf course. Why do men go to golf courses? Because they need to go somewhere to relax, even though what they're doing is anything but relaxing. But they're going there to be somewhere else, a change of environment. And that's why it's important. But it's also important to understand that if you do multiple environmental changes all at once, you can end up in a maladaptive or non-functioning environmental misadaptation, where you're not able to adjust to the environment because there's so many different stressors coming in that it overwhelms you and you just stagnate where you are. Super stressed out because you can't work like you were working, but not able to relax to where you can finally feel comfortable doing it. And environmental psychology too your environment can add to all kinds of other things. If you go from, like in my case in the military, I went from reserves to being activated for Iraq, and so we didn't go to NTC. We went from my reserve unit to our sister reserve unit. We joined together. Then we went to a training base on the East Coast. It was Fort Dix. And we did 3 months of training. Why? Because as a reserves, you only meet once a month, 2 weeks out of the year, so they needed time to acclimate back to active duty life. And then, as we finished up our training, when we got over, they didn't send us over to Iraq to immediately go boots on the sand, boots in the sand. In November when we got there, we spent a month in Kuwait. Why? To physically and mentally acclimate to the desert as a military unit. And then when we went into desert, we acclimated. We spent a year there. Each of us got about 2 weeks leave. Now there's an interesting key to that 2 weeks leave, because like I said before, it takes on average 2 to 3 weeks to physically acclimate. But it takes, and as I said before, it takes three weeks, sometimes a couple of months, to mentally acclimate. So when you get that 2 weeks leave, it's not enough time for you to unacclimate. To acclimate or unacclimate to either side. You'll go over there, you'll spend some time, you'll go back, and it'll be like there was very little downtime. Now, if they gave you like a month off and you came back, you'd have to spend another 3 weeks in country re-physically acclimating, and more than likely re-mentally acclimating, which means you're not going to be functioning anywhere near 100%. And that just can't happen. I mean, it can happen, but it's bad for everyone. So when it comes to environmental psychology, it's understanding that your environment, not just your physical environment, but your mental, emotional, cognitive environment, has long-lasting effects on you and how you interact with it and what you do with it. Obviously, this has been something that's been studied for many, many years. It was before they called it environmental psychology. It was just kind of like, cultural psychology. It didn't start off as cultural psychology, but it kind of did. And then as we became more knowledgeable in the field, we were able to, when I say we, I mean researchers, psychologists, psychiatrists, licensed counselors, so forth. We became more able to look at the data and determine, that this was a factor. I mean, think of it this way: the military was claiming, people were dealing with shell shock and hysteria back in World War I, World War II, when what they were dealing with was anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress, amongst other things. And so as we've gained more knowledge about these things, we've been able to put them in there. But environmental psychology isn't always negative. It can also be positive. If you're able to make a successful transition from environment A to environment B, then after a couple of months, what would have been a hostile environment becomes a neutral environment because you're used to it. And it makes it easy. Now, of course, there is that issue of going from a hostile environment that's neutral to you to a neutral environment that's less hostile to you, or to a less hostile environment that's very less hostile to you, like 2 steps removed. Because that can be, this is where you can end up with what's called adjustment disorder. Adjustment disorder is you're changing from job A to job B, you're trying to adjust, you're trying to get corrected, and you run into the brick wall that you just can't. Like, no matter how hard you try, you're stuck. And it's something that we work on. And in fact, I see that quite a bit with veterans who are coming out, soldiers and active duty people coming out of the service. Adjustment disorder is the biggest thing as they come out, because they're going from military to civilian. And it's an environmental change as well. The environmental protections, your environment offers you protections, mental protections, physical protections, that allow you to operate in that environment and have very little mental or physical stress. And as soon as you step out of it, those protections go away, and the stress that you didn't realize you weren't under, suddenly you're under. So it's good to keep that in mind when you're dealing with that kind of stress. And yeah, so hopefully this has been informative. I do plan to do a longer form, like a kind of a deeper dive into the topic of environmental psychology, cognitive psychology, behavioral psychology, so forth, and break it down for a military perspective so you have an understanding. Because this isn't just, here's the disorders and here's the things you go with. It's also a look at psychoeducation for veterans, helping you understand psychology so that you can apply it, or have an understanding of how it's applied to you, so that it's not this vague mystery of, new age mumbo jumbo, which it's not. The fathers of psychology, which would have been which they talk about Freud, Freud, Wundt, it's all a bunch of German guys. What they fail to mention is that psychology was being researched as far back as even before the Renaissance. They just didn't call it that. And so yeah, do some deep dives. But this is to help educate. So hopefully, if you're a undergrad looking for just some quick information, if you're a licensed counselor trying to look at how this affects veterans, if you're a veteran or military personnel trying to understand the shifts in environment, that's what I'm here for. Obviously, if you like this, if you like it, you think it's good, awesome, wonderful. Subscribe, like, come back for more. I'll try to be making more of these things. Even some long, fast. Leave it. If there's a specific area of psychology you'd like me to talk about that's related to veterans, by all means, put it in the comments. And other than that, I'll catch you later. Government property out.